who was so kind to moderate today's session. Welcome to you as well. We are grateful to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, actually, to provide the premises for today's meeting, though it came not for free. However, this is largely compensated by the presence of the Director General for International Cooperation, Christian Rehberger, who attends this meeting free of charge. So on balance, thank you very much. Today's session was actually inspired by a meeting in July of the European Think Tank Group, and ODI is part of the European Think Tank Group, like German Development Institute and IDRI, a think tank in Paris, and ourselves, with the Commissioner, where we discussed the future challenges of European Development Cooperation. And as European Think Tank Group, we offered to the Commissioner our knowledge resources, actually, to make a meaningful contribution to the consultation on the future of European development policy. And reach out to interested stakeholders, but also to the wider audience. So it's very gratifying, actually, to see such a huge turnout. And earlier meetings were held in Warsaw, Dublin, Munich, and Paris, and this is the last of the series of 5. So quite an effort by the European Commission and the Commissioner himself and his team, actually, to reach out to all of us who are so engaged on European development policy. Just a few words as intro to our dialogue of today. At ECDPM, we see many changes impacting the future of European development cooperation. A serious existential crisis in the European Union in the wake of Brexit and rising populism, a newly agreed 2030 Global Sustainable Development Framework and a compelling climate change agenda, and major geopolitical shifts. In addition, cuts in ODA, such in the Netherlands, where if you remove in-donor refugee costs, future projected ODA comes to under 0.44% of gross national income, further increase these challenges. Indeed, crises on Europe's borders and the resulting influx of migrants and refugees are the dominant issues on the international agenda of European policymakers, and hence increasingly on the development agenda. Given all these developments and the recent launch of the European Union's Global Strategy for Foreign and Security Policy, it seems like a very opportune time, Commissioner, to ask where European development cooperation fits in the mix, and to review the overarching policy commitments of the 2005 European Consensus on Development. Indeed, what we are discussing today will give direction to the next 10 years of European development cooperation. Furthermore, over the next 2 years, the European Union will undertake a midterm review of the current EU budget, start negotiations on the next 7 years budget, revise its 20-year relationship with the countries of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group, all while trying to respond to ongoing crises and integrate the Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, the stakes are high for getting it right. How will Europeans' interest to address topical political issues and the necessity to connect to citizens be balanced with more structural long-term approaches necessary for development? There is, however, some good news. In a Eurobarometer survey from February 2016, where almost 9 out of 10 EU citizens expressing that it is important to help people in the developing countries, with the figure for the Netherlands being broadly the same as the EU average. Today's event offers an opportunity for those in the Netherlands to connect to the European debate and for Europe to connect to the Dutch debate on how best to meet future development challenges. ECDPM as a broker of dialogue, as well as a provider of expertise that is both Dutch and European, is therefore more than happy to host this initiative. Despite being a think and do tank, at ECDPM we understand that sustainable development comes through multi-stakeholder dialogue and action, not just well-written policy documents. We focus on the policy to practice challenges, and as a non-partisan institute, we won't just seek to inform the discussions on the European Consensus on Development. A wise statesman once said, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results. ECDPM will continue to follow the new consensus process through to its implementation in order to support it to make a meaningful and practical contribution to development. Indeed, the absence of a formal evaluation of the implementation of the last European consensus is a weakness that we feel needs to be rectified in the future. Finally, given the challenges laid out above and the high stakes facing Europe, development cooperation and the achievement of the global goals, we look forward to a lively exchange of views and a debate today and beyond. Thank you for your attendance and your contribution to the debate later. And with these words, I would like to hand over to Kathalijne.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Ewald, for this kickoff. It's a real pleasure for me to moderate this debate of the ECDPM. I'm a former member of the European Parliament and also now a member of the National Institute for Human Rights, and in that capacity I also have a lot to do with the Sustainable Development Goals, which is also on the agenda for today. So it's a great pleasure because the topic is important, the European development policy for the coming years, but we're also at a critical moment, just weeks away from the publication also by the European Commission of the European Consensus on Development. When is this morning a success? Well, I think it's a success when we have advanced based on 3 goals. First, when we have learned more about the direction that the European Commission intends to take. So when we have a sneak preview. Second, when you feel that you have been given the opportunity to also give some input still on this strategy, that you gave some last minute, that you managed to maybe give some last minute input, which may be still to some changes. So that's also an objective. And lastly, I think this is a success when the European Commission, the Commissioner and also some of his staff, have managed to feel the temperature about how his document will be received in the Netherlands and by Dutch stakeholders. So that is 3 challenging goals for only a short period of time, but I figure that we can manage it with so many experts here in the room. So also for me, thank you very much that you came here and welcome. I suggest that we just really get started. And where better than to start than by the man who is responsible for initiating and for drafting the revised consensus on development. Someone who has served in national parliaments, as a minister, as a deputy prime minister in his country, and who is now our EU Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development, Mr. Mimica. Please, the floor is yours.
Very good morning to everyone, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear development enthusiasts, experts, development scholars, development practitioners. It is a real pleasure and a duty, I would say, to be with you today, this morning, just a month or a bit less than a month before we finally wrap up the draft proposal for the new revised European Union's consensus on development. This is a time for me to listen, to reflect on how best fit into the final outlook of the development consensus your views, your inputs, your contribution, and this is exactly the purpose that led us through Europe during the past few weeks. Yes, indeed, there are several questions to be answered before setting the final outlook of the consensus. And the questions, some of them have been already answered. The question on the what what is the reason for, or what is the need for the new development agenda, new global 2030 agenda, the answers on that questions are more or less clear, or much more clear than on the two other questions. And two other questions are what is the new content, the new reasons, the new need for the European Union to revise its own development consensus, its own global strategic document that would lead, that would guide our development actions in the future. And the third question might be, how shall we do it? How we should act together in a more coordinated, more coherent way in order to keep Europe at the helm, I would say, of, as the strongest global actor in the implementation of the new development agenda. We have been there at the helm of the negotiating process, of a process of designing, setting the new agenda last year, years before. Our contribution to the outlook of the agenda was really important. European Union, member states, Commission, we were able to speak in one voice, strong voice, in order to get to the agenda. But now it's a time to start implementing it, and the European Union should be there, must be there as the strongest global actor in the implementation of the agenda. Therefore, this is the framework for our discussion today, and for the next steps in the European Union's response to the implementation of the agenda. The European Consensus on Development is not the only strategic guiding, steering document that will be in front of us soon. In parallel to this document, first Vice President of the Commission is Franz Timmermans, is leading a group, a team of a commissioner that would come by the end of November with a comprehensive, overarching European answer to, or European response to the sustainable European future, as our response to what Europe should do or shall do in order to respond to the universal concept of the new 2030 agenda, which means what we shall do in our internal and external policies at home in Europe and in our relations with the member states. So, end of November, on the 22nd of November, I do hope we shall be ready for the both discussions at the College of Commissioners on the communication on a future of sustainable future of Europe, and on the draft proposal for the new consensus on development. And in the meantime, there is another third overarching document, which is global strategy, already mentioned, European global strategy on foreign and security policy that Federica Mogherini, High Representative and Vice President of the Commission, already in June presented to the European Council in order to steer also the European answer to the Sustainable Development Goals, to reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. That is also a very good basis for our consensus for development. So, all in all, we would like to come soon, during the first half of the next year, in a discussion with the member states, with the parliament, with all the stakeholders, not only from the European institutions, but also from the civil society, academia, private sector. We would like to get the ownership, the overall European ownership of the new consensus, of the new Sustainable European Future document, and of the global strategy, to have it as as a European document, European response, not as a Commission's or single member states development policy guiding or strategic document. Because in the end, the key question today, once we went through all the changes in the global arena, but also once we get to the point where we adopted the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, global development agenda, where we entered actually a new development universe. Now the key question for me no longer is do we have enough growth? Is growth high enough, strong enough to move the development goals forward? But the key question is the growth sustainable enough to enable us to reach such a broad, interlinked, interconnected network of sustainable development goals? And this is the answer we seek. This is the answer we would like to discuss today also here in The Hague. I offer my heartfelt thanks to the European Centre for Development Policy Management and to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs for hosting this discussion here today. Our partners in cooperation for the last 60 years, the Dutch government, civil society, private sector and academia have been long-standing supporters of an active and ambitious role for the European Union in the relations with the wider world. Yet, for the first 50 years of this cooperation, our development policy lacked a single unifying vision. The first European consensus for development between the European institutions and all of our member states was agreed only in 2005. This consensus, which has guided our common actions over the last 10 years, has been hailed as a major strategic success. Not only has it made our development more coordinated, more coherent and more effective, it has also focused attention on our primary objective of poverty eradication and our common fundamental principles of human rights, peace, democracy, solidarity and equality. While these are universal values which should continue to drive our efforts, we also need to adapt to a world today which is very different to the one we faced in 2005. The global population is growing at a tremendous rate. More people are on the move than ever before. And the most vulnerable in our societies are increasingly suffering the consequences of conflict, climate change and insecurity. Yet, over half of the world's wealth is concentrated in the hands of 1% of the population. We are perhaps the first generation that truly has it in its own gift to bring an end to global hunger and poverty and to address these inequalities. Sustainable development is the best tool we have in the long term to create a more prosperous, stable and equitable world. I know that we have a strong ally in the Netherlands in this respect. When you took over the presidency of the Council at the start of this year, you emphasized the importance of prosperity, freedom and security. And indeed, moving forward, if we are to ensure the ongoing success and relevance of the European Union's development policy, we must recognize the interdependence between peace, security and development. This means ensuring our development, security, humanitarian and migration efforts are all aligned. And it means aligning these policies with others, such as trade and investments, energy and agriculture, just to name few of the policy that calls for coherence, for their coherence for development. We also have to pay greater attention to key cross-cutting drivers. And first and foremost, for me, these key cross-cutting drivers are women and youth. They need to be at the heart of all our development activities, not just as beneficiaries, but as active participants in the first place. We know that we will never achieve truly sustainable development if we leave half of the world's population or if we leave the next generation behind. Of course, there are other important drivers, such as clean and affordable energy, actions to tackle climate change, and the focus of our discussion today, the increased investment and decent opportunities for people everywhere, men and women alike. The landmark agreements adopted last year recognize the core importance of integrating all aspects of sustainable development, social, economic, and environmental. Never before did humanity possess such a strong universal blueprint for our common future as the one we forged, first in Sendai on disaster risk reduction, then in Addis on development financing, in Paris on climate change, and of course in New York with a new 2030 agenda and its sustainable development goals. But that alone is not enough. It's time to turn our commitments into actions. We need to start walking the talk, at home and abroad. What I want to discuss with you today is my proposal for a revised European Consensus for Development, as I already said, in line with the 2030 Agenda. Beyond its 17 goals and 169 targets, the 2030 Agenda is ultimately about people. It is about human dignity. In the 2 years I've now served when I served now as a European Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development, I have traveled to so many different places and met so many different people. But the one thing which unites them all is their desire for human dignity. For the farmer in northern Kenya, in Samburu region, for whom investing in a safe and clean water supply meant he no longer had to drink from the same source as his cattle. It's about human dignity. Or for the women in northeast Senegal, whose husbands were forced to leave home because they could no longer find work to provide for their families, our agenda, our development policy, it is again about human dignity. And this is what I want our new consensus to be about our world, our dignity, our future. It is important for me that we can provide real and sustainable opportunities for these who need, for all those who need it the most. We will have to work together harder to ensure everyone has the knowledge, skills, capabilities, and the rights they need to enjoy a life in dignity. To be truly engaged in society as responsible and productive adults, and to ensure the social and economic well-being of their families and their communities. Effective education and vocational training will help young people in particular to improve their future prospects and to find quality employment. In order to achieve that, we must make the best use of all of the resources that we have at our disposal. I am extremely grateful to the Dutch government, therefore, for having stepped up its efforts to meet and exceed the 0.7% target of GNI as official development assistance. So far, only a handful of member states have risen to this challenge. But even if and when all countries, all 28 EU member states, but all other developing countries hit this target, we should still be only looking at 300, 400 billion euros in grant capacities per year. But to fully implement the Sustainable Development Goals, however, some estimate that we will need closer to 3 or even 4 trillion euros annually. So, does this mean we should simply give up? Of course not. But what does it mean? Is that we need to use the official development assistance we do have in a much smarter way. Successful engagement with the private sector is one of the keys to the success of the 2030 agenda. And ODA, for instance, can be a catalyst for unlocking much higher levels of investments, much higher engagement of private sector in development partnership. We know from our experience that this can and does work. During the last budgeting period, we created almost 20 times more investment in developing countries. From 2.7 billion euros in European Union grants, we triggered almost 23 billion euros from other financial sources, investing in projects worth over 50 billion euros. Therefore, in order to go from the billions to the trillions needed, we have to unlock the potential of the private sector. We need smart growth that not only creates decent jobs, but growth which is resource efficient, low emission and climate resilient. We need smart growth which encourages sustainable consumption and production. And we need smart growth which generates revenue, which can be used to improve public services. We should also help our partner countries to create a more business-friendly investment environment by promoting better policies and regulations. To put these ideas into practice, we brought forward last month ambitious proposals for a European External Investment Plan. It builds on the successful model of our internal investment plan for Europe, from which Dutch companies and creditors are already benefiting. The external investment plan seeks to open up opportunities on a global scale by de-risking investments in regions and domains where the private sector would otherwise hesitate to engage or would not even look at those markets, because they are risky, they are fragile, the overall economic environment and competitiveness environment is not there. This includes promoting investments in fragile states, small and medium enterprises, infrastructure and renewable energies, and opportunities for women and young people in particular. At the same time, it seeks to improve the investments and policy environment in partner countries. In doing so, it will also become one of our most powerful tools in addressing the root causes of irregular migration and forced displacement. With just over 4 billion euros from the external investment plan, we could generate 44 billion euros of investment. This is our, I would say, modest assessment, or even up to 88 billion euros if, or should I say when, member states and other partners match our contributions. Imagine how many farmers' lives that could change, or for how many families that could hold a better future. These approaches stems from the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for Development Financing, which sets a realistic and solid framework for implementing of the 2030 Agenda. one that combines sound policy environment and the effective use of domestic resources with aid, with grant capacities, and with the investment, with private sector partnership. And it is an approach the Dutch government supports, including through FMO, the Dutch Development Bank. Another essential element for our new consensus, which the Netherlands has been rightly championing, is the need to rethink the partnerships, all our partnerships moving forward. I fully agree with you that we should continue to focus our support on those who need it most. Out of your Dutch 15 partners countries in Dutch development cooperation, 10 of them are in Africa. It is also my firm belief that the highest concentration of our official development assistance should still go to the least developed countries and fragile states. But like you, the European Union should adopt a transition strategy which combines trade, investments, aid, and other instruments for other countries who have managed to graduate to greater financial stability. Middle-income countries. Middle-income countries have a crucial role to play in the implementation of the SDGs, and differentiated development partnerships will be key to ensuring their continued engagement. I would be very keen to hear more about your experience in fostering such partnerships. For example, on increasing knowledge in the area of taxation through the training and technical assistance you offer to partner countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that we can continue here today in the great Dutch tradition of inclusive consultation and cooperation. One of the strap lines from your presidency of the European Union was, in Europe we stand stronger together. There is more that unites us that divides us. I hope that through our discussions this morning and through the forthcoming proposals for the new European Consensus for Development, that we can show that we stand shoulder to shoulder, not only in Europe, but in our partner countries across the world as well. I hope that we can come together in partnership to promote the values of human dignity which unites us all. Thank you very much, and I really look forward to first to the questions, then to the panel discussion, and I will hope we'll be able to have some concluding remarks to wrap up the whole series of a similar events with the think tanks and our partners in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for showing us the direction that you intend to take, and which we will see hopefully the 22nd of November. The Commissioner allowed for one or two real pressing questions. So are there important questions to be raised now? You will also have the opportunity during the panel, but maybe there is somebody who wants to raise a question now. Yes, there's a person here. A lady.
Commissioner, it's good to see you here, and not in Brussels, where we always meet.
Can you please say your name?
Yes, good morning everybody. Yes, very short. I'm Isabella Tota, I work for Coordinate, the Dutch organization, but I'm also a Concord board member, and also representing a European organization in the CPD, which is the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. So thank you very much for your presentation about the consensus. We have been working with you and your people on this for quite some time. I would just to stress the importance of effective development cooperation and how the how effective development cooperation principles of Busan and also the New Deal for Fragile States and all would support also a proper implementation of the EU consensus on development.
And do you have a question?
And well, it's a word of encouragement to the Commissioner to because the European Commission and the European Union as a whole is a champion of the development effectiveness agenda. We are very much looking forward to very good discussions in Nairobi at the end of November, beginning of December on this topic.
Okay.
And perhaps one small question to the Commissioner about, you mentioned the leave no one behind agenda, which is very important. You mentioned the focus on fragile states and also marginalized and middle income countries. The concrete question is that how do you see, for instance, a possibly combined trade and aid agenda rollout the best way for those settings? And allow me to be very provocative with one question. Do you still think that ODA should be spent to reach those furthest left behind in middle income countries, especially in countries where they can actually do that themselves?
Okay, thank you. I think we have to leave it by this one question, but it is also a very important question, so maybe respond to that.
From Kathalijne EU. Sorry. So I received this. Is this okay?
If you, yes, it's okay. But if you have a brief question, we are a little bit under time pressure because of the panel. I can say it now that one of our honored guests has to leave quite soon, so that is why I'm pressing. Afterwards I'm more relaxed, but this is why I'm pressing. So if you have a brief question, that would be great.
I'll keep it snappy, and it may come back in the panel as well. So first, Kathalijne, and you also on the board of Concord. It's really, my question really is this, is how do you see the development and security nexus, perhaps the ring fencing of development to avoid overlap into security, or the opposite? Where do you see that going? Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. So, I'll start with first of three questions that are in front of us right now. Trade and aid. Trade has been important element of the overall coherence for development approach that we would like to strengthen, even much more to strengthen it in the new consensus on development. But the question is, what kind of trade? What should be the real substance of a trade impact on the development, on reaching development goals? I would dare to say that so far we've been a bit narrow in bringing trade into development arena, because the most of our trade-related development actions were somehow directed towards market access, towards better market access for our partner countries' products in Europe. Okay, doing the same, maybe not completely time-wise, reciprocal and symmetrical way when it comes to European export to the partner countries, but market access was somewhere at the helm of the trade and aid coherence, and we need to go much more beyond market access in this respect. Therefore, even our economic partnership agreement that we signed with a number of regional organizations, especially in Africa, but not only in Africa, Pacific and Caribbean as well, they should be more economic, or they should be more focused on improving, increasing the impact of the value chains, of the supply chains, of making our partner countries more capable to process, to add values to the products they have or to the resources they have, not to enable us to take value away from their industrialization or production capacities. So this is a role where we would ask and propose and facilitate and motivate private sector as well to be more responsible in bringing in bringing more values to the supply chains in the partner countries. And the third element that could be also coming out of the trade aid relation is strengthening the regional cooperation, economic regional integration, and economic and trade regional capacities of our trading partners. On middle-income countries, the major process in front of us is shifting, transiting from money to knowledge. Actually, this would be, let us say, the major guiding lines that should come out also clearly from the new consensus. But the key word in this process is gradual. We should gradually move from money, from grants, to knowledge policy dialogue, knowledge-based policies in middle-income countries, and this is process we would like to keep on running, not increasing our grant projects, not increasing our funding in middle-income countries, but increasing their capacities to develop under the cooperation in the various areas of policy and knowledge dialogue gradually with middle-income countries. After all, middle-income countries, in middle-income countries there are more than 70% of the world's poor population living in middle-income countries, so they might have some more internal capacity or more internal resources, domestic resources to tackle the development issues, but still they need some of our at least guidance and assistance in this regard. And on security and development, I would say we really have to overcome the, should I say, traditional views and traditional way of doing development cooperation as a standalone, singled out policy based or centered on ODA and on the grant capacities. The new agenda, be it in Addis or from New York, calls also for this stronger nexus, links between peace, security and development. We need to be aware that the poverty is at the same time cause and consequence of instability, of insecurity, of conflict, and therefore tackling the root causes or the instability and insecurity in our partner countries is complementary and not contradictory to our development goals. So there will be, I do hope, very clear definition of this link in the new consensus, but with also very clear lines that should be drawn, that should not be trespassed, lines that would bring into this security development links almost something similar that we have in a trade policy or in a market access policy when we speak of everything but arms. Here as well, yes, from development funding we could do much more, but not arms, not military equipment, not lethal weapons, not armed, not let us say real supporting real military capacities. So this is the framework I would like to see well defined, well understood, and well recognized by all European stakeholders in the new consensus as well.
Well, these are two very clear answers to three questions even. Thank you very much. You've said that you want to stay for the whole session, and also in the end also comment on that what has been said. So we're very grateful for you to be here for the rest of the session. So let us then turn to the next issue on the panel. Thank you, Eva. And of course you will be able to have much more also input, also to ask your questions. That may be later on by raising your hand, but you can also already write your questions on Twitter. There's the hashtag Mimica DebateNL. You can ask your question then, and then it will come to me. But there are 5 people that we have invited here to explicitly also comment on the document and on the proposals presented by the Commission, and I would like to invite them here to come on stage. So, Mr. Aart-Jan de Geus is Chairman of the Board and CEO at the Bertelsmann Foundation. Mirjam van Rijssen, Professor at the Tilburg University and Chair in International Social Responsibility, inter alia. I mean, you have so many functions all. I mean, I'm just mentioning one, you know, because Daniela Hirsch, she's Director of both ends. We have, oh, it's already been done, that's perfect. Christian Rehberger, Director General for International Cooperation here at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Giovanni Mastro Giacomo, Policy Coordinator in the Director General for International Cooperation and Development, and actually the one who's also coordinating the papers, you know, the writing of the paper. So that's always great to have his master's hand here at the table. I said already that we were pressed, and that's one of the reasons that Mr. Aart-Jan de Geus has to leave, but we're really grateful that you're willing to be here with us at any case. You have been a Minister of Social Affairs in the Netherlands and a Deputy Secretary General at the OECD, so you know the political field very well. You hear a lot of ambitious proposals here on the table. What kind of message would you give the Commissioner in order to arrive also at this better world?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Buitenweg. And it's when you said that you would be more relaxed after I have left, it reminds me of the time that I was in Dutch politics here, and some of the parliamentarians also used to say that. But the real reason that I would be happy to leave for maybe in 20 minutes is that then this panel would be composed of a majority of women, and that is very much in line with the objective that the Commissioner said. It's very important that the future of this world is very much more decided by women than it was in the past century. So,
I agree.
That said, I would say that I want to pick up on the focus, Mr. Commissioner, that you gave us. You said in the end it's all about human dignity. And this focus on human dignity is also part of our work in the Bertelsmann Stiftung. We do, as you may know, the Bertelsmann Transformation Index already for a number of years. And we found out that in the last couple of years, the human dignity is very much under pressure. The freedom of assembly, the freedom of press, the pressure of religious dogmas, and that all comes to human dignity. So not only the connection between development and trade and investment is important, but also the connection to security issues and democracy issues. So I would say that indeed the development aid needs this more holistic approach. By the way, I would commend the ECDPM because it's one of the few institutions that really have the expertise to comment and to contribute to such a strategic and holistic approach. Well, if that focus on human dignity is important, then we need indeed a more holistic approach. And this is the fantastic opportunity that the Sustainable Development Goals give us, because never in human history we had such a comprehensive agenda on all these objectives, and never also in human history we had this historic legitimacy of the heads of member states of the United Nations agreeing on this. So this is really something we have written history. Prime Minister Rutte and his colleagues have written history under the leadership of the Pope. He was chairing the thing. I think that they didn't allow somebody else to preside over that meeting for that moment. But in the end, you know, this is an agenda for all. It is not just an agenda for developing countries, it is also an agenda for development, but developed countries, and it is an agenda for emerging economies. And let's not forget that China, I spoke with one of the people in the audience, She's from China, and we talked about the fact that China in itself is still a developing country in many, many parts. So this is an agenda for all. The SDGs is an agenda for all. And I think that so this is the second point I want to pick up from your speech, Mr. Commissioner. And we look forward that the EU consensus is there. Now, if it is so important, then of course there is the English saying, put your money where your mouth is. You referred to the 0.7 and you praised the Dutch for contributing. And thank you for this appraisal. As a Dutch citizen, I contributed to that. But we look back to the past and we heard from Ewout Wermuth that there is a political discussion to go down on that road. And you were aware of that you choose to just praise us and then leave us with the embarrassment whether or not we deserve this appraisal. So this was a very political approach of yours, not to address the Dutch national political debate, but just to say, well, the Netherlands are praised for this, are praised for that, you took the initiative. It's very interesting, but the facts are that in 2010 it was 0.8%, in 2018 it will be 0.5%, and we in the Netherlands, like in some other countries, we make the historic mistake to mix up development aid and refugees programs. It should be the other way around. The more refugees you have, the more need there is to invest in the situation in developing countries, because the one and only real thing you can do about refugees is to make them happy at home. And if you make them happy at home, if you don't make them happy at home, you will have more refugees next year. So if you reduce development aid, you will have to increase the other thing, and if you are mixing up, you will end nowhere. It's a negative spiral. And this is particularly true for Africa. Africa is not Syria, it's not Afghanistan. Refugees will not come with thousands. They will come with millions if we do not make them happy at home, if we do not invest there. So, that said, I would say that the connection of dignity and the connection of the SDGs and then the urgency to put your money where your mouth is and not to mix up these two program points on development aid are very important. Can I maybe make one comment on Dutch politics as well?
Please.
Yes. As a former minister, there is a good habit not to intervene in party political debates, which I will not do. I'm just an observer. I'm just an observer. So what I know is that in 10 days we have here the parliamentarian debate about the budget for 2017 and beyond. In 10 days, more or less. That will be a debate between Minister Ploemen and Prime Minister Rutte. Because Minister Ploemen has to defend a budget proposal where the budget goes down, and Prime Minister Rutte last year in New York with the Pope said, we want to go up. He said, I am committed, and I have the text here, it's important to read the text. Development countries to implement fully their official development assistance commitments, including the commitment by many developed countries to achieve the target of 0.7% of GNI. So Prime Minister Rutte was the one who was praised by you, and it is Prime Minister Rutte against himself, or maybe Minister Ploemen, I don't know, or maybe it's the other way around. But there is an inconsistency in the Dutch proposals, and this I can say as an observer, that target 17.2 will not be reached if the proposals that are on the table for the debate in 10 days will be approved. And this comes back to whether or not we put human dignity in the center. This comes back to, do we put human dignity in the center? But it's not just human dignity, it's also political integrity.
Well. Well, thank you. And this is only when you observe.
I hand over the report that we did on the SDGs because it's so important that we measure indeed also where are we going. And I had the pleasure to discuss with Mr. Weber and also the fact that the SDGs, if they are indeed important, it's important to measure them, and we try to contribute to that.
And so this is a report in which you looked at the different countries and said.
Yes, where they are on the SDGs. It's a kind of a dashboard.
It's a kind of a dashboard. Oh, that's great. Thanks. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think it's only appropriate to invite Mr. Weber from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs to respond.
Thank you. But before I do this, I would like to thank Commissioner Mimica and welcome him also on behalf of the Dutch government. And unfortunately, Minister Plummer couldn't be here, but she's already very happy that, as you say, in the Dutch tradition of inclusion and of the polder model, as we call it, we're very happy you're here to listen to, let's say, the different opinions in the Dutch society on where we should go with the European development policy. So thank you very much for coming here and listening to us. And somebody who really embodies the Dutch polder model is our former Minister De Geus, who had a long tradition in that area in both labor and in the Netherlands. So now I just like to say a few things in response to what Minister De Geus said. It's
funny, you say Minister.
No, former Minister of Defense, but well, you know,
we're so used to it.
Yeah, we're so used to that. No, I agree. I mean, this is the political debate we should have in 10 days in Parliament, and of course, I could stress the fact that during this current term of Prime Minister Rutte's second government, he's always said, I mean, we didn't quote that, but the same debate he quoted that, well, we could not reach this 0.7 during this time of government, but that we're still committed to that target, and that's up to a new government to decide where they want to go with this target, and well, let that debate take place, and I think that's a fair question you've put on the table. But at the same time, I think the current government also not only took care for asylum seekers in the Netherlands, which is, let's say, like any other country within Europe, attributes to the ODA budget, but also invested more to humanitarian aid and the receival of and support of refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, etc., with huge extra budgets.
You don't need to defend, but you agree that this is a debate, which is an important debate, which should take place in 10 days' time. That's very good. Maybe a last question I would like to ask, to follow up on what you have said. You said trade is really, can be very important, but you should not forget that you should also build the institutions, and that they should not, can you develop a bit more like how you, because there's nowadays much more of a focus on trade than previously, and how do you see that relates then to building up institutions?
Yeah, it goes back to my experience as a Minister of Social Affairs and Employment, and also the work that I did in the OECD. And there are a lot of governments, a lot of politicians who like to design a program, and they tell the people, we will bring growth and we will create jobs. Now, this is illusionary. Politicians do not create jobs, and politicians do not create growth. This all comes from the private sector. It comes from the private sector. Growth and foreign direct investment, etc., comes from the private sector. What can politicians do? They can set the right framework. They can set the right context for trade and investment to grow and to develop. And that we can call trade policy or investment policy, but it is not to invest yourself or not to trade yourself. It is to create the environment. And in this environment, we see that the context of the rule of law, the stability of democracy, the security issues are extremely important for private investors to decide whether or not to trade in a country, to invest in a country, etc., etc., etc. It's a very worrying signal that last Monday in the Financial Times we read about this research of the World Economic Forum that private investors put more trust in non-democracies or non-Western democracies like China, Singapore, and what was Dubai was another. Then they put in democracies like Brazil, South Africa, India. And this has to do with the instability of democracy. And if we do not invest in the framework of the institutions, if we do not invest in making these institutions reliable and credible, then trade and investment, whatever preach you do, will never flourish. So this is why I would say that the political agenda to foster trade and investment should start with the stability, security, and democracy issues.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Maybe Daniela Hirsch, Director of Both Ends, you would like to comment on this?
Yeah. Thank you. There are so many things that we can say. I really appreciated your introduction. There's very hopeful elements in it, especially your focus on the alignment of policies for development and trade and tax, because there is, of course, a huge challenge there, policy-wise in Europe as well. And I think the role of the private sector is a good example of that, because I think we're walking into a trap. And I'm going to talk from the experience as a Dutch organization. We have been implementing a trade and aid policy for the last 3 years, starting before that. Although the ambition was huge, we believed that the private sector would help us bring development. I must say that my own analysis is that that will only happen if once you engage with the private sector, the rules of the game are clear. And one of those rules of the game, for example, are the OECD guidelines, others are the UN Guiding Principles. There's so much out there that seems to be logic to implement, but in fact most companies don't. And therefore, while they engage in development with the best intentions on paper, in practice that oftentimes goes against social and environmental objectives. And I think the tendency is to look at the private sector as if they don't exist yet in developing countries. Of course, they are a huge player in developing countries. So looking at it from the perspective of a holistic view, I would say, and challenge from the standpoint of the SDGs that are also about us and our companies, also European multinationals, start implementing what we have and then come to us to talk about development. Because it's all out there. It's about our change in how we invest, how we treat local communities when we create a mine or we build a dam. It's about the way we work, and the rules are clear, but we don't implement them. I do agree that the private sector is a very important player in development. It always has been. Of course, our whole relation with other countries started from a private sector development perspective. I think it's time to sit down from a political point of view as a development sector with those that serve the private sector and its development and talk about the rules of the game. And that for me is an important part of the policy coherence of the European Union, but also an important part of the transition that we have to go through. And it would also help you solve one of your problems, the 0.7, which I agree the Netherlands is like having nice words, but it's not performing great. But how good would it be if our export instruments, that for example in the Netherlands are 4 times as big as our ODA budget, would be geared towards the Sustainable Development Goals? It isn't at the moment. So we wouldn't even need to look at that 0.7, but we would start to work with the 99.3 to work for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I would love the vision to take that stand. It is our job to see where the alignment is, but don't ask for all the money that we have for helping poor people to get a better life, or women to be more dignified, or whatever you want to do.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. I also have problem in pronouncing your last name, so I'm limiting myself to Kathleen. Well, I think I'm glad that the discussion is moving a little bit to the policies, because I think ODA is extremely important, of course, and I think there is an issue of credibility for the EU to reaffirm very clearly the 0.7 target and to make the most to get there. I think it's extremely important. And I'm not going to do the mistake of lecturing a Dutch audience about the importance of money. Of course, it's of paramount importance. But having said that, I think we have an agenda in front of us, the 2030 agenda, which has a key shift in the philosophy of development, because it puts really at the core the importance of policies. We have been in the EU talking for years about policy coherence for development. We have been producing interesting reports looking at how certain policies carried out by the EU could negatively affect development. I think we have now the opportunity to make sure that we move to initiatives to make sure that this doesn't happen, and that what we do tries to mirror the ambition of the agenda, which is to look together at environmental, social and economic aspects all together, because they're linked. And they're linked also, as the Commissioner was saying, to the security dimension of issues, because poverty is at the same time cause and consequence of conflict. So I think this is important. That's why I like the idea that you mentioned, that we should engage with the private sector in a more structured manner. We should have a frank, open dialogue about rules, about how to better involve the private sector. I think this is very much in our intentions. It's, for instance, a key aspect of the European external investment plan, which is not only, as people tend to think, a guarantee to make sure that the private sector can invest in places and in sectors where it's most risky. There is also the idea to create a more structured dialogue with the private sector, to talk to the private sector about challenges, opportunities, and so on. And I think we need that also for the implementation of the 2030 agenda and for the new consensus. And by the way, let me also stress that we have started this work on the consensus, trying to reach out as much as possible, like today, but we have done many events. There was a big public consultation to which also the private sector participated. So I think we are slowly, very slowly, unfortunately, but we are slowly getting there.
We're already very much really on the topics. We come back later also to all other matters, but it's interesting now to develop a bit more on this trade issue. I think what we see now is that so having rules is very important, building institutions is then very important, and also coherence, we said. But when I was preparing for this debate, I read also previous papers, and their policy coherence has been one of the main priorities, I think, for a long time. So when I saw that now one of the new initiatives was policy coherence, I thought, well, what's new? So what kind of extra steps do you think will be included in the paper? Because is it otherwise just like management by speech? So like at some point they must really believe it and do it?
Yes, you're right about this in the sense that we don't only have to put our money where the mouth is, but also our policies where the mouth is. And it's a big challenge because issues are interrelated in a complex manner. It's not always easy to tackle the interconnectedness of issues. I think what the consensus can reasonably do is try to take the fact that the new agenda finally recognizes the importance of policy coherence for sustainable development, so adding this dimension of the environmental issues and making sure that there is a real European agenda on policy coherence for development. Because frankly, up to now, it has been pushed by just the European Commission and a couple of member states. I think we have to really Europeanize this agenda, creating instruments where all member states are playing the game, basically.
Okay, so you mean that also, this must also affect the relations or the deals that are made between the member states and the European Commission?
What I mean is that I think the basic idea of this new consensus is that we have to work much more closely together, as the Commissioner was mentioning at the beginning, with member states. This is true in all the areas of development policy. It's also true for policy coherence for development. So I think policy coherence for development has to be one of the key elements of this working together between member states and the European institutions.
Okay, so there are two levels of coherence: the coherence in policies of the EU itself, like trade, etc., and there is then the coherence also in the relations between the member states and the EU. Between the member states and the European Commission. I think that brings me to a point that I wanted to ask Amir van Rijzen. You're a professor at two universities, I believe, dealing a lot with international responsibilities, as it's called. How do you see, if you could structure just an ideal situation of the relationship between the EU and the member states in terms of their development policy, how would that look like? Because it's often from this whole this future perspective that then also the new policies can be directed.
Well, thank you, Kathalijne, for a great question. Commissioner Nederland, thank you for this great opportunity to debate about really some very, very pertinent political issues. And I think your question is really about vision. And the key to a vision is, to take back what Arjan said, political integrity, reliability, and predictability. I think that what is important about the experience of 60 years of development cooperation that we have built is that we have been able to set up institutions that really give us strength in having a long-term vision on how we arrange our development cooperation. And there are a few elements that I would like to pick up that have come here in the panel. First of all, the policy of coherence is always going to be a very difficult discussion because it's very political and it is rooted in the real changes of the political realities and how they change. So it's always going to be difficult. But the truth is that the article on coherence came in through the Dutch presidency in the Treaty of Maastricht, and it is because it is part of the treaty that it has remained part of the political debate, and therefore we are all the time able to put it on the agenda. So this is where the relationship between the member states and the European Union gives great strength, because initiatives come from the member states, but also the European Union helps us to settle that. That brings me to the question of trade. We can't really discuss trade if we don't recognize the role of the private sector, certainly, but also the role of governance. And within the European trade dimensions, we cannot then discuss that without understanding our cooperation with the ACP. And I was at a debate last week in the ACP House. And actually one of the things that really happens when you go into a debate now with the ACP at this point is that they really feel hurt they feel hurt that in the Lisbon Treaty they are no longer mentioned as these historic partners of the ACP. And I think that that is a mistake, especially in the light of Brexit. We can see the whole UK collaboration with the Commonwealth coming up. I think that the European Union needs a trusted partnership, and I think that, that this consensus offers us a possibility to recognize the ACP as one of those crucial partners next to others. There's the African Union. Actually, it was interesting in that debate because the argument was made that there would be a competition, and interesting enough, the African Union was sitting there at the table and was saying, oh, there's no competition in international relations. We have multiple ways in which we engage, and the African Union stands very well next to the ACP. The ACP is important because it is the one partnership where we can, with governments, discuss how we create a credible long-term perspective around issues of trade and security, where we create an agreement on what the role of countries are and how in international corporations we set these in long-term agreements that are then also binding. And that brings me to the last point, and that is that binding agreements is important. And the 0.7 perspective, the 0.7 implementation of an ODA norm is truly a norm. Yeah. And so what has happened here in the Netherlands is the part of the budget that has gone to asylum is a small part. The budget is actually structurally reduced by 2 budget cuts of 1,750,000,000 that will be structurally reducing the long-term engagement. And so and that is I think where Minister De Geus used the word political integrity. I mean, what we are finding is that in terms of our political commitment, we are still committed to 0.7%, but in our reality, we know that this will go down to 0.4. I think what was good in the consensus in 2005 was that the European consensus included this as a European commitment and set the targets and the steps of how we would achieve 0.7%. And I think that including that as a commitment again in the consensus would help us. And if you allow me to make one last point, it is important that Europe helps the member states in setting an agenda, and I think that is what we need. But it is also important that from the member states we allow bilateral policies to express our own identity in international policy. The problem is that if we go down to a budget of 0.4%, we will be able to implement our European commitments, even our international commitments. But what will be cut is our bilateral commitment. And I think that in the long term, that will actually create a danger for European agenda, because without commitment at the national level, we can't give strength to a strong European agenda.
Thank you. And then you say, well, there should be a kind of, there is a task both for the member states separately and for the European Commission, although they should influence each other, and the European Commission should also inspire some of the actions of the member states, but the member states should also have their own priorities. And you say, well, that is now reducing. How do you see the relationship between the member states and the European Commission, and also the added value also of the consensus?
Well, actually, I think for the Dutch government, one of the value adds is exactly as you mentioned, that initiatives you take as a bilateral donor of the member states, you can through the EU get skill and get more, put it in a more political context for a broader agenda, and for the Dutch government, that's really one of the value adds. Let me give one example, which is also about the trade issue, which you were all referring to. The Dutch palm oil sector agreed in 2011 to have 100% sustainable palm oil supply for their products. Well, if you want this really to have an effect globally, you need more partners. You need to bring such an initiative first to a European scale. So what they did and what the Dutch government contributed to is to set up a European Sustainable Palm Oil Initiative. And now 8 other European private sector industries in the area of oils and fats have now agreed to do the same, to reach a 100% sustainable palm oil by 2050 and then for 2020. The Dutch government, when we had the presidency, we organized a big conference on how we can, let's say, link aid and trade also on the European agenda. And we tried to convince other member states to sign what we then call the Amsterdam Declaration, to work also on the same issue and to make their to make the framework in such a way that also in their countries there would be 100% sustainable palm oil supply. So this is an example where I think we can use bilateral initiatives to scale, also to as Danielle was referring to set the rules right. I mean, it's not fair if you only do this in one country, for instance in the Netherlands, but you will have a better level playing field if you do it globally, and then you start on the European level.
That's an example from what's currently happening, but of course we have the rare opportunity now also still to influence also some of the what will be written in the revised version of the European consensus. So ideally, how would you describe? How should something change? Should there be more of a coordination from the side of the European Commission, or what would you have changed?
No, what I see is and this palm oil is a good example, but I see within the European Commission a really changing attitude where issues on development, and this is for instance a coherent issue with trade I was just referring to, are not just done within the Commission Mimica department, but on a broader scale, look to what's happening with the new trade policy. I mean, there's so much attention in this trade policy on, let's say, sustainable supply chains, and not just on the, let's say, the classical issues of everything that arms and lowering the terrorists. So I would encourage, we would hope, the Dutch government would hope that these initiatives, where you are coherent in other areas of your work, will come up, will spread, so to say, and we see the right works, but we also see some good steps. Tax is another issue. I mean, we've been trying to raise this issue, not just to strengthen tax administrations with ODA money, but also to work through the BEPS agenda, which has been put on the, has been an initiative also. The Commission has been very advanced. How can we stop tax avoidance?
I always think something else when I hear about Dutch taxation and development.
Yeah,
but I don't think about the situation. This question: how can we avoid tax avoidance?
But you then just look to the facts. Which countries have been revising their tax treaties to see if there's any clauses to make sure that there's no longer an abuse of the fact that you want to avoid double taxation? I mean, that's a clear example of trying to be coherent.
Well, I want to ask you also, just on this issue of coherence and the relationship between the member states and the EU, about what should be done differently. But before I do it, I think it's also a bit nice to know who is in the room. And so for that, I actually would like to ask you to all stand up. So could you all stand up? Could you all stand up? Well, you don't need to stand up because we know. Yeah, I know it's a nice exercise, but. Those who work for an NGO, can they raise their hands? Okay, can you sit down? It's not a disqualification, it's then I know who's left, basically. Those who are civil servants, can they raise their hands? Okay, can you sit down as well? Those who work for a think tank, include, all right, yeah. Oh, you continue to sit. That's really mean. So he too. Researchers, academics. Right. Thank you. Yeah, you can sit down. The private sector. were hesitant, like what you were, weren't you?
Civil society, but not academic.
NGO?
Yeah, NGO. Did you say NGO?
Yeah, sorry, that's not it. Okay, so it's a bit of a pity that the private sector is underrepresented, but we see a lot of people from civil society, a lot of people from civil servants, of course, also. So, well, it's good to know who's in the room. And so now then the question also to you, like what would you like to have changed in the relationship between the member states and the Commission for the next revised document? Who would like to say something? Nobody, you're all perfectly happy. That's great. Okay. Now I'm going to walk to myself because then I can just hold the microphone and take it back. So, you had asked the phone. Can you say your name?
Robert van Dijk, I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Well, I think the issue of policy coherence for development is very important. And how are you going to achieve that? Because I mean, we've been wrestling for that for ages now.
Policy coherence between the institutions or in policies?
Well, both are. I mean, it's both important between EU and member states, but also within the EU itself. And I think I would like to look at the EU itself at this moment and think, how can you change the working methods?
Can I just first ask before, but then I come back to you? Is that okay? Because I first would like to know, in the relationship between the European Commission and the member states, like should there be more of an agreement that the policies are more in line, or is it okay that the European Commission has a policy and that member states are just having supplementary? Is that something that needs to be changed, or is it only the policies themselves? So can I come back to you then in a bit? So yes, please.
Yeah, well, my remark relates to the remark that Christian Weber just made. My name is Bart Romein. I'm director of Partos, which is a branch organization of Dutch development NGOs. That relates to what Christian just said. I think the major issue in coherence, and that's also kind of an elephant in this debate, is tax. We just saw a very good initiative by the Commission on tax harmonization between the member states. There's a lot of resistance. The first thing we got from the Employers Association, well, we won't accept this. And this is the major issue. I'm very happy that we kind of criticized the remark on the 0.7, which is of course not what has been said enough, but this amount, and even the European Parliament calculated that the EU itself is deprived of 70 billion euros a year because of avoidance and evasion of tax. This is much worse in developing countries. This is a much larger amount, and if we talk about added value along the supply chains and private sector, I think this is an issue where the European Union and its member states should be really at the helm. And I think this is the kind of elephant that's always avoided, and I think that's where we should have a kind of common stand.
Tax. And so that's of course because on some of the issues, member states then say you've got nothing to do with my policies on taxation, so that's a kind of a sovereignty question. But what I feel in the room is that actually the main issue is are you, yes, please, I give you the floor.
Some practical information. In 2013, the ministry published a report about a continent, both on development assistance and on the new policy of trade and diplomatic relations. Latin America and the Caribbean. The development assistance was ended, but the results are really interesting. At the level of embassies, 20% of the time of the second secretaries, first secretaries, and minister councillors is spent on donor coordination. The second point, there isn't any difference felt between the efforts of the European Union and that of the other bilateral donors. The Union is, in the words of two of the ambassadors, another bilateral donor.
So you think there should be better coordination?
Oh, much more. And even when there is coordination, it isn't done by the European Union, but by the UNDP or by like-minded countries, and informally with the USA.
Okay. Maybe I can ask Giovanni. as he calls me Kathalijne, I'll start it as well. Can you comment maybe on that? So it's the idea that there must be more coordination because actually otherwise the EU is just the 29th donor maybe.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would like to say that the expression that sparked this discussion, the bilateral identity that was mentioned by Miriam, I like that a lot. I think this is a strength of the European Union, the fact that there are bilateral identities. And I think that it also plays well in the European system. There are member states which champion certain issues, and certain issues are on the agenda of the EU collectively because those member states champion them. 0.7 by the Netherlands, but also talking about the Netherlands, gender, sexual and reproductive health and rights, development effectiveness. I mean, I could mention even more issues. I think it's a strength of the EU, and when we say that we need more coordination, more joint action, we are not meaning a harmonizing sort of action. We mean building on our collective strength, which is also made up by these bilateral identities. So I want to be clear about that. Having said that, I think that it's very clear that the EU can do more in terms of coordination, both at policy level and on the ground in countries. I think this is very clear, and we would like to improve on that.
Okay, Daniela Hirsch?
Yeah, I just want to also say where we think that the EU is doing a pretty good job. In terms of adding to, maybe in reaction to your remark, and also talking a bit about the same region actually. We see that the European Union, contrary to many member states, has a very strong policy on civil society. It recognizes its political role. It specifically states that it sees its role as engaging politically with civil society, as building civil society from the bottom up. So it has a very strong vision there, which I think could inspire. In this case, it aligns with the policies of the current minister, but not necessarily the next one. I think it is important to recognize that this is a valuable policy, that you have a value added there, also in the region in Central and South America, where there is huge pressure on civil society, and we all know this because of the killings and the murders and everything else. And that there is a lot of space to put these policies into practice together with the member states that are present in specific countries. And I think that would be appreciated by the member states. So there is a huge opportunity there. You have a policy in place. Now again, go to the implementation. Make sure that the roadmaps for civil society development are put in place and are implemented. Make sure that whatever policy processes the European Union engages in a specific country starts with engagement with civil society, local civil society, not necessarily the international ones. And look at funding streams that really target the groups that are on the ground, because in the end, and that's our experience, they are the ones that are most are the biggest example of where policy coherence actually doesn't happen, because they feel where the crunch of tax against water management, of large infrastructure development against social issues. So you have gold, and I think really you have gold there, and I think it is an issue that will be under a lot of pressure in your member states. So if you put this on your agenda and in your vision as a consistent line towards development, then I think we would have a big gain.
Okay. And should then so this is something that the European Commission is doing in particular, and should they then also make sure that the member states do that, or are these just two separate channels?
Well, I think several member states at least have intentions towards civil society, so that's why it's interesting to look at specific regions. I think if the European Union would take a much more leadership role and show what political engagement is about, then member states would chip in. They would follow that line. I think it's much more difficult for an individual embassy or a member state to be the lead in that sense. Okay. So there is also value added.
Yeah. I'll ask you, and then I come back to you.
Floris Fabric and Act Alliance and Concord Board. Just 2 points. You asked the question about the coherence in the member state level. A couple of days ago, I was at the launch of the Aid Watch report, and there was a request from a senior person at DevCo, at Development Cooperation, that we engage with our member states to ask for perhaps more funding or more administration to go through DevCo. And he wanted our response to that, and I didn't have a response, but your question is really well placed, yeah? And I think, Miriam, what you are saying, the diversity is incredibly important, and I think it's important for at least 2 reasons, yeah? One of them is that it gives country-level ownership from within the EU at a time when we're seeing a decrease in interest. Well, politically that's what we hear. Yeah, if we look at Eurobarometer, that's not the case. But let's show what we are doing as nations within the EU to drive this story of development and get country-level ownership. I think that's really important, yeah? Within that, yes, the question of coherence is important, but it's actually, for me, it's yes, you know, let's agree a consensus, let's agree some directions, we've done all of that, yeah? But there's still some questions around actually the Paris Agreement and what we're doing around the administration of aid for partners, for recipients, for NGOs, to make it easy to deal with multiple donors. Yeah, that's one. Number 2, the other reason why it's important to have a multiplicity is actually it allows for innovative programming. If you have just one large donor, yeah, then you can't get the creative discussions that you can have with different donors with slightly different perspectives. And I think that's what also drives innovation and what drives new forms of programming and new methods of reaching the poor. Yeah? That's one. So then on the question of trade and aid, and also again coming back to the, are we allowed to do that? Yeah? Very briefly, then I won't.
No, shall we leave it here and we come back to that? But because now I think a lot of things have been said. Interesting thing about the relationship between member states and the Commission. Also about it's said from, well, it should be different countries have different inputs and things that they find important. It's important that that is being heard. At the same time, also maybe a little bit more coherence, also to ensure that it's not like double work and that it's not overburdening maybe countries to deal with so many different donors. Miriam, last word on this issue?
Yeah, I can see there are a lot of questions and I also would like to hear from the audience, but very briefly, I think what we're getting right and what is good, and I heard the Commissioner also emphasizing that when he stressed the value of human dignity, is that we have an agreed common set of values that drive our development cooperation and that allow then individual contributions from member states to come in, and that is what we need to preserve. The adherence to human rights, the rule of law, ownership, these are the key principles that really define our European Union policy and for which our partners recognize us and where they actually see that we are doing it differently than some of the new players on the field and where they value the cooperation with the European Union. So I think a value-driven policy, and that is what I hear the Commissioner proposing, is good because if those values are clear, that sets a possibility for a predictable policy that then allows us to also respond as new challenges, unknown challenges, perhaps will come and will be met within the context of the policy.
Okay, thank you very much. But the EU is not a value-driven policy. I hear what you say. Sometimes the EU has been criticized for having a very value-driven development policy and less of a value-driven policy, say, to discuss also the internal setting of the EU. But I get very much your point that the development aid that it should be more value-driven and that it's an added value. I see before we turn now a bit more to the policies and to the coherence of the EU policies, because as we've said, that is something that has been advocated for a long time. There should be much more coherence, but it's really hard to accomplish that. And so you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah. Now, I think one of the reasons why it's difficult to do that is because of the working methods. If you look at the Commission, for example, it's all the different silos that we work in. And how are you going to break those silos down?
Director Generals, or how do you?
Well, it's not only about words, it's also about how are you going to implement those beautiful words. And how are you going to implement those beautiful words is by having an integrated approach. And how do you achieve an integrated approach? Is by working together beyond the silos. For example, having flexible task force. I mean, we experiment with that in our ministry, and we work in task force with other ministries together, and we see that it works very, very well. Now, how is the Commission going to approach that? Is it also going to work more in task force, inviting also, for example, think tanks to join them, and private sector to join them, so that you can get really an integrated approach and have integrated policies?
Well, thank you. Maybe Christian Reberger, from the experience also in the Netherlands, like what advice can you give to ensure policy coherence? Now, it's not as if the Netherlands maybe always put it completely coherent, but imagine. And so what advice could you give?
Well, the technical answer is, I think, what Robert said. Work together, find each other. We have a joint task force on water with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water. We have a joint task force on migration with the most relevant ministers who are working together, both on political as on senior civil servant level. But well, at the end of the day, this is, well, as many of you have said, these are political issues. I mean, if you have to balance different interests, and you can only do it at a political level. So and I think then ministers of development cooperation would support Minister Mimica with his debate with his other commissioners, as let's say our Minister for Development Cooperation brings in, let's say, development issues in the Council of Ministers when we talk about tax or when we talk about medicine or access to medicine. So I think we've seen good example on as I said, on trade. We had joint meetings during the Dutch presidency with trade and development ministers. We've had joint meetings on climate and development. But I think more of those examples are needed. That it's, well, not just said, but do it in practice.
Okay, and I said the question, but will the Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, are they not meant to bring coherence? So is that something that is a real opportunity, or is that lip service? Oh, Miriam wants to say something.
Well, I mean, I think that we shouldn't confuse the fact that coherence is within the treaty and therefore is a legal obligation. We shouldn't confuse that with the content of the policies. You know, we have a law to make sure that they can be judged according to the objective of development cooperation, which is poverty eradication. So there are mechanisms, but you can't, I mean, you just hear the Netherlands, we can't have discussions. We would go back to the Soviet Union to decide a 5-year plan of how we're going to be coherent. We need to have the political processes to resolve them and the standards to see where we are going. And so it's important that we understand we need to be coherent in order to achieve and contribute to this goal. But I don't think that the consensus would be right to map out completely what that means. For that we have politics.
Okay, I come back to you, Danielle, but first here there are 2 urgent questions on this issue.
Danielle Roche, Oxfam in the Netherlands. I'm still stuck with your previous point about what do we want the EU to do, or where should member states and the EU come together. And I really feel that, or at least our position on the European consensus, the EU should really set the bar. And it should not, sort of blindly follow some of the trends that we've seen in member states in terms of development and trade policies. And I think, Danielle, you rightly pointed out aid for trade or aid and trade, that can be also a trap, and we don't know whether it works. So what we wish from the Commission in formulating this consensus is to really, first of all, not blur the lines between public and private, because that's a really important thing. I mean, we all want the same world, and the question is, how do we exploit public and private finance towards development effectiveness? And where private finance or private sector undermines public sector or public finance, we should not do it. We wouldn't do it here. We would not, in Amsterdam, that's where I live, we would not have people pay for schools or whatever. European citizens wouldn't accept these kind of policies. And I think so when you look at the functions of public and private finance, that I think should be really one of the drivers of sort of assessing what instruments you're using in the new consensus. And something that really bothers me, that's a very Dutch level approach, is we're saying we don't need the old instruments like ODA anymore, but we haven't actually said why we don't need them anymore. What we see is we have shrinking society space, women's rights are under threat. 47 countries in the world are still direly dependent on aid. So why are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater before we actually made an assessment? It's an instrument that's not perfect, but likewise private finance isn't perfect either, and it doesn't reach those very poorest countries. So I would hope that the EU sets a bar and sort of tries to take member states along with it.
Yeah, I find it very interesting to hear from the discussion that actually the hopes for the EU are very high. So I see you talked about they should value driven, they should set the bar. It's whatever the member states do, the EU should set the example. So that's quite a complicated task, I think, for the EU. But it's a very clear message that you want the EU to show leadership in these documents. So you had a question on this issue also?
Yes. It's a question and a comment. There is, for instance, a coordination mechanism within the EU, within the European Commission. It's called the EU Water Initiative. Now, the interesting part of that mechanism is that it includes 5 different DGs of the European Commission. It includes people from line ministries of different countries and missions that have different agendas, mainly development cooperation and environment, which is almost exactly the basis for the SDGs. We have this mechanism. At the moment, there's civil society in there, there's business in there, everybody's basically there, all main stakeholders. While we're saying we want coherence, while we're saying we need mechanisms to implement the SDG, we are letting this mechanism die. DEFCO's been told, don't invest in there anymore, don't convene a meeting. So one of my pleas would be, if you have a good instrument, please keep it, and if it needs a little bit of tweaking, let's do that, but don't throw away again the baby. Secondly, one thing in coherence is also listening to the people that you think you want to represent. So thank you, Commissioner, for mentioning women and youth twice, but there is no point in what you said unless the things that women really would like to do in terms of actions are in the policy. So thank you for mentioning vocational training, because that's one of the most important things for women. So I would expect a really good program and policies on vocational training, not in the traditional jobs, but especially aimed not just at the youth, but also at adult women. And in consistency with that, make sure that the money that is available reaches these groups directly. Don't hide behind administrative difficulties. Get it to them.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's also a second clear message. I think this fits also with what Daniela Hirsch said and what actually also Artel de Veu said about the need also to involve people themselves also in the decision making. I saw one of you. Yes, Christian.
Well, just a suggestion. In the Netherlands, well, you were already referring to this Polar model. We have an initiative around these SDGs, which is called the SDG Charter, which is not a government initiative, it's an initiative of the stakeholders, some of them are gathered here. So because we acknowledge the fact that it's, we can only reach SDGs when we use both knowledge institutes, NGOs and businesses. So we organized an event in Brussels, and many of you were there, to see if we can get this to the European level. I think that's a good example. If we're really serious, and that's one of the suggestions I would do also for the Commissioner, we can maybe see if why don't we let's say have this consensus signed not just by member states, but also some commitments through the NGO sector, the business sector, so that it's really not just, and it's very good to be here and to listen to everybody, but there's also commitments on a higher level, so to say. That would be one of my suggestions.
I just looked, we're running out of time, but it's so interesting to collect all these contributions. I think before I invite you all to make still some closing statement and to comment on anything you want within a reasonable time, I still was wondering, we've discussed the issue a lot about the private sector. There was also an explicit request also from the European Commission to see if we have some more ideas on that. People say, well, don't mix up too much the private sector and also the responsibilities or the ODA money, as you said. Is there maybe somebody also more from the private sector, or is there some more positive contributions to say, well, like what could be the role of the private sector? Is that maybe? I know we have René. You want to comment? Yeah, I think there are not many of them, so you're immediately. You can also use two. Yeah. Oh, you can both. We've got two. Okay.
Yes, being working for FMO, private sector investing, I think we have a very good platform now, which is the SDGs. I think that gives a clear direction for business, but also for all the other parties we're working on to build coherence and to build a genuine agenda for development. So for us, it's really a step forward to work with this agenda. That means that you have to work together with politics, with government, with NGOs, with private sector in a very broad way. Well, this morning, as a good example, the financial sector signed an agreement on sustainability, which is published now. I think that's also the main minister signed it. And I think these are all sorts of initiatives where we can learn from and where we can see how we can move forward. And we're not yet there, but we are working on it. But the SDGs are very relevant in that. Regarding the whole issue of different financial streams, I agree that you shouldn't mix up in the wrong way, so to speak. But in the current situation, you have to look how you can combine these different streams, each with their own role and their own position in the system. And I think if we're able to do that, we can multiply every stream of money into development. And I think that's important.
Thank you very much. You also, well, I always wonder when I hear about all the businesses going to also help us realize the SDGs. Why are they doing this, and how are they going to do this?
Because there's self-interest as well, of course, for the private sector.
I didn't figure that.
Well, I like to believe that the company I work for has a genuine interest in bringing development to these countries, combined with a fair business interest. I work for Rabobank. Just to comment on a few of the discussions I heard, for private sector I think life is very practical. So coherence, for instance, is not a goal as such for us. I think that's logical. So I see Jan Bade sitting there, who really, by having a Dutch agenda, got Rabobank into Rwanda. And for me, it's about the practical implications of what you do. To be honest, I've never seen European Union being a great executor. So that's something to support the sort of national identities we discussed a little bit today.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So we're almost at the closing end. Well, I mean, the panel can still comment, and then I will invite the commissioner still to comment. This is your chance still to give some input in the making of the paper, which will be hopefully presented the 22nd of November. I know that there are a lot of people. I mean, I've seen many people still raising their hands, but I'm afraid I look at the organizers. I think we are running out. Yes, I see we are running out of time. So, but of course, we will later have a little drink and still be able to give some input. But for now, we have to stop. I would like to ask you, and I'll just take the order because I'd like also at the end also Giovanni also to comment. You can still have the opportunity to give your input. Miriam, you first.
I want to make 4 short points. First, I'm very happy with the discussion that we've had here on coherence, and I hope that it will feature strongly in the consensus. One thing that was kind of underneath the debate is the importance of civil society organizations, NGOs. We saw it here in the presence in the audience. It is something that is a key feature of European Union policy, and I hope it will remain a strong actor in the consensus, recognized along other actors like the private sector. I think it's important to recognize the role of governments and our trusted partnerships. I hope that the ACP will be recognized for that. Finally, I do really hope that the commitment of achieving the norm and the practical steps towards that of 0.7% will be part of the consensus. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Maybe to say a bit about where we as the Dutch government think the European Union has really some room to have more impact in its policy, and what we will bring also in the debate in November. And the two things. The first thing is, which is already mentioned, I mean, the European Commission, I think, has a huge potential and has already shown in many areas where it can really coordinate the position of a member state and combine it with other more political agendas. We've been supporting this. I know there are good examples on the ground where the European Union has really played this harmonizing role, decreasing fragmentation, low rate transaction cost, and we applaud you for that. And as we are the co-chair of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, we think this. Well, we really support it. We really believe this agenda is still needed to build upon. So that's one. And the second thing is they're focus on those areas where you can only work together. Let's, for instance, migration. We haven't mentioned it yet, but that's really an example. I think we can only solve issues of migration, stop these terrible models of smugglers, these routes from migrants fleeing from countries to Europe. If we also do it on a European scale, and part of that European scale and intervention should be development cooperation. The root causes, humanitarian aid, and there I think the European Commission has already shown real leadership, and of course it's not perfect, but I think it has shown leadership, and this is an example where we can really see impact on the ground.
Thank you very much.
I just want to pick up on the whole thing of policy coherence for development being a political issue. I agree. But our political processes have already established many agreements. We all ratified human rights conventions, we all adhere to the OECD guidelines, etc. So instead of making a woolly statement on policy coherence for development, it might be great, or it would be great from my perspective, if in the vision of the EU it would start enforcement of these agreements reached through political processes. So it's not out there like still to be discussed. No, we've agreed on it. The only problem is that we don't implement. And I just want to give you one example, and you're in the Netherlands, so you have to get bored by all these examples from the Netherlands, but yesterday a study came out by a financial institution, and it concluded that of the 60 companies that are engaged in international development or invest outside and or also on the stock exchange, only 18 publicly adhere to the OECD guidelines. Still, companies like Heineken, I mean, these are not tiny companies. Heineken invests a lot in Africa, gets a lot of development cooperation money for that work. ING, one of the biggest banks of the Netherlands, Boskalis, one of the biggest dredgers of the Netherlands, none of them adhere to the OECD guidelines. These are not out of the box, sort of very complicated stuff. It's simple, it's out there, we've agreed on that. And we still give development aid to these companies without demanding that they adhere to it. So there is so much out there that if we would choose to agree that this has been a political decision, now start implementing it, we would get a long way in implementing the SDGs without to do a too high a demand on your 0.7%. That's the one.
With the last word, I mean, you've to comment on also on the leadership that has been asked, and also the need to really implement that what has already been agreed.
Yes, thanks. Well, that's exactly the first point I wanted to mention. I think we also consider that the EU has to take a leadership role in the implementation of the agenda. Because if the EU doesn't do it, nobody will do it. There is so much of European values and also of the European outlook on global issues and global challenges in the agenda itself, that it would really be impossible to understand that the EU doesn't take the lead in the implementation of the agenda. So we are convinced of that. It's really, we have to set the bar indeed, as somebody was saying. I think that the expression is the right one. And by the way, this is already creating the kind of interactions in working methods that somebody was mentioning. It's happening every day. Actually, I have the impression that I don't do anything else all the day long than talking to other departments, other people. And it happens even at political level, because there are project team of commissioners working together on key priorities, on key issues. So it's really the way this commission works, even more than, much more than in the past, I would say. Then the second thing I wanted to say is that in order to be credible, in order to take the leadership in the implementation of the agenda, we have to work better together. That's also very clear to us. We have to put together our energies. We have to be much better in improving our development effectiveness. We need to do more joint programming. It's an element that on which there have been attempts in the past which have not been extremely successful. So we can do better in terms of joint programming, joint implementation, joint actions. And then the other point I wanted to mention is we also agree that we need to stick to the 0.7 commitment as EU. ODA continues to be key, especially in the poorest and the most fragile countries. There, if there is not ODA, there is basically no action. So the EU has to stick to its commitment, but at the same time we should be able, exactly because we need to focus the poorest, we have to be able to use ODA in a more clever and more targeted manner, and we have to differentiate our partnerships with developing countries. We have to look at their needs and adapt our tools, our instruments, our political dialogues to the needs of the countries. And finally, I think the whole debate showed it, policies are key. It's not only an issue of money, it's also an issue of having the right policies and also helping developing countries to create the right policies.
Well, thank you very much. All four of you, I mean, we can stay, but I would like to, well, thank you all four for your last comments. I've seen the Commissioner listening very attentively to all the comments that have been made, many comments, and maybe I could invite you to share with us what your thoughts were when you heard all this.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed for your comments, inputs, your suggestions, because for me this was the most rewarding, the most content-wise and input-wise. This was, let us say, the most useful discussion debate I had during the past 3-4 weeks in 5 of think tanks across Europe. And I'm not saying that just because of courtesy, because I'm here today, but you witnessed today what your inputs, what your contributions were. And definitely it is the right time for us to take on board all of them and to make them important guiding lines for the consensus to be finally designed. I would just start by addressing 2-3 issues that were so prominently floating around this discussion in this panel. Commenting first on the coherence issue, actually. There is there is no such thing as a single European development policy, not in real life, not in practice, nor in the treaties, in the Lisbon Treaty. There is a very clear notion or very clear treaty line on a policy coherence for development in all our policies, and there is very clear call for the coordination of the member states' development policies. And this is what we really do. This is what the development policy in Europe is about. It's about coordination, it's about coherence in all, or at least in these two aspects that we spoke about today, the coherence between the policies and coherence between the development policy of the member states and the Commission. I would just like to point to short aspects of this coordination of the development policies. For me, it is important to go beyond the coordination and to go into coherence when it comes or a better coherence when it comes to having not 29 but as close as coherent development impact of the European Union across the world. So therefore, when it comes to treaty provisions, yes, let's transit from coordination to coherence. And we do have even some concrete tools. We might happen not to come to this point, but joint programming is one of the tool, one of the way, one of the concrete example how we can really do or how we can really make our development policy more coherent, how we can make it more open, how we can bring together in the at the planning stage of our ODA contribution or our grant contribution when doing the policy, the joint programming. And we do it now in 3 countries. Next step will go up to 40 partner countries. So this is a process how we can bring it together, or how we can transit from coordination to coherence. And the second point on that is that we have even written in a treaties that we shall cater, that we shall take care of the policy coherence for development. But what we need, what comes out of the whole new agenda, on the whole of all of the changes, is a need to have policy coherence for sustainable development. Not only policy coherence for development. This is a bit broader and more demanding concept, but let us not shy away from really having a policy coherence for sustainable development. The other point is on migration or migration development relations, and especially in the context of the ODA targets, goals 0.7. I would not comment, and I would not even go into naming and blaming any of the member states when it comes to reaching the 0.7% of the GNI as the ODA target. But my task, my job is to do over the time to make it happen that collectively all member states come to 0.7% by the end of the 2030 agenda period. So this is a process we are on. We are a bit more than halfway to that to reach that goal. But if you look into figures, into numbers, into ODA figures for instance 2014, 2015, you will notice there is no evidence that the, let us say, in-house costs for catering, for hosting the migrants or refugees in Europe, in the member states, that these costs reported as ODA actually decrease let us say, the traditional ODA. Last year there was an increase, global increase of 9 billion euros of reported ODA by EU member states. Now out of this 9 billion, 5 billion euros came from this, let us call it in-house asylum or hosting refugees in Europe, and 4 billion was an increase in a traditional ODA. So there is a growing trend of ODA growth and the reporting of asylum internal cost as ODA. It is possible under OECD, under DAC rules, each country could report ODA for hosting the refugees during the first year of their stay in the country. So this means, even in terms of number, that 2015 might be the highest level of reporting in-house costs for refugees, having in mind this 1 year period only as reporting. So, but I would definitely, this is not, I'm not pointing at the figures in order to somehow defend the reporting of in-house costs as ODA. This is DAC issue. This is possible. This is something that is there. But in my view, we should really all work and try to get the ODA figures high. To get them as close as 0.7 as possible, the traditional ODA figures. So we are now at 0.47, 48 as collectively as the European Union, a long way to 0.7 yet, and I wouldn't like to see definitely that there is kind of a, yes, I would say, kind of artificial increase because of reporting the in-house or asylum costs as ODA. This is in all other migration development links and nexuses are rather clear. Migration agenda is development agenda. Tackling the root causes of migration is tackling the root causes of poverty, of root causes of underdevelopment. And therefore, we should really look at migration in an agenda in a broader context, or at this link development, migration in a broader context. Because I see that migration agenda has at least two tracks. One is internal European track, and the other is our external actions, development actions. In internal track, there is, everybody would recognize, there is no clear migration solidarity, the issues of resettlement, relocation, asylum procedure, border management, whatever you take. They are more divisive in Europe among the member states than uniting us around the internal migration agenda. But when it comes to development impact on migration in our external actions, then it is a uniting factor, a uniting element of the EU development policies. Each and every, I haven't seen any of the member states that would oppose the idea that development must be much better embedded into migration goals and migration agenda abroad, and vice versa, that migration or tackling the root causes of migration should be more and better embedded into our development policies. So therefore these are really complementary and not contradictory issues that we have to deal with. On private sector, just to confirm actually that what we do is really not diverting or not giving up the ODA and turning to and focusing on facilitating or motivating or the private sector investments and private sector engagements in the development partnership. These are processes that goes together. We already spoke of using the ODA in a smarter way, not on giving up ODA, but using it, part of it, to reach also the goals of better engaging private sector and also better engaging the domestic resources of our partner countries. So in that context, we also should draw a clear line when we engage in our grant capacities, ODA capacities in facilitating investments. The lines that we should have, you know, as a clear red lines that we should not and must not pass, is that we go and assist private sector engagement only in the countries or in a project that would otherwise that would never happen without this without both blending European grants with the financial capacities of the international financial and development organizations and private sector, and establishing a de-risking mechanism, guaranteeing schemes that we have now, or we shall have now under the European External Investment Plan. So we should go only when and where private sector would not go without such support from the instruments that we launched, that are under development right now. And the second line should be also that it must be kind of it's not the same to have external development, external investment plan and internal European development plan, investment plan. In the external investment plan, the policy, development policy is much more important to when selecting, when deciding which concrete project qualifies for the development for the such a be it blending or guarantee support. So therefore we have to keep this policy policy goals assessment in the investment in assisting or facilitating the private sector investment in order to avoid this blurring or mixing between the private sector and the public sector interest. And the third point is that we should do the private sector engagement mostly or even completely under project that could qualify for ODA reporting. In that respect, there are still no clear OECD or DAC rules. We should work together to extend with the traditional ODA, the traditional DAC or ODA DAC rules, because nowadays they are only public to public or state to state related DACability rules or donors and recipient rules. Once the private sector is there, then there is still no clear lines what kind of a support, what kind of facilitating private sector could qualify for ODA reporting. So this is a part of the process in front of us to do it together. So I have here 13 small print pages as a concluding remark, but I would stop somewhere here because all other issues are related to the real reasons behind the new consensus on what should we do in the new consensus in order to answer the two key questions. Why we need it, what are the new elements, what are the new reasons to revise the existing consensus, and the second question is how shall we do it. But the most of the answers were somewhere in this room with us today, so I wouldn't go again into repeating them or pointing them out more more vocally. So once again, thank you very much for this exchange of views, comments, ideas. This was once again the most useful, the biggest contribution that I had from all the series of our discussion with the think tanks, with the European Development Universe members. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much also for your concluding remarks, and for the frank way how you've also addressed us. This, I believe, I mean, we will only know at the end of November, but I believe it really has given us a sneak preview in the document, and I think that is very valuable. I also would like to thank the panel very much for their active contributions. So Mirjam van Rijzen, Christian Reber, Danielle Hirsch, and Giovanni Mastro Giacomo. Thank you very much also for contributions, but also you as a public. I mean, you've been very active. I know there were so many other people who still wanted to comment, and maybe you can send maybe emails also. I'm sure there will be follow-up sessions also of the ECDPM, and this discussion has not finished, of course, but thank you very much also for your active contributions. I would like to thank also the ECDPM for organizing the session. I think this indeed, I mean, if this was one of the most useful ones, then I'm sure they're very willing to host many more. And I would like to invite you now for a drink and to discuss with each other what we've heard. And I want to thank you again for a very lively and informative session.
Thank you.
This afternoon, but have to him to tell us if he needs a few minutes now, maybe to have a glass of water,
coffee,
and a coffee. Very good. So I tell Salvatore.
Say goodbye because I have an emergency.